Oh,
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Yoder, Editorial Director of Calkins Creek, the U.S. history imprint of Astra Books for Young Readers. And I am here today with Gail Jarrow, the author of American Murderer, the Parasite That Haunted the South, and with Barbara Krasner, the author of Ethel's Song, Ethel Rosenberg's life and poems. And we're here to talk to them about their books and their feelings about writing YA. So I'm going to start it off with why write American history and why, what do you hope young adults, teens will get from American history? And really, what is your purpose in writing? So we'll start with Gail.
Hello, everybody. I write American history because I think it's so important for young people to know about our past. And that's because I really believe the past repeats constantly, and that's due to the fact that human nature doesn't change. So things that have happened before, the way they progress, it's going to happen again. And it can be predictive and it can provide hope. So for example, my books, many of them are about diseases and epidemics and horrible things that have happened in the past. When COVID-19 hit, I could predict the direction things would go with society and with the medical research and so forth. And there was hope there because we have been through this before and we've gotten through it and people have survived. So I think one of the best things about knowing American history is that it can give you hope.
Great. And Barbara, you have your take on Ethel Rosenberg was, as I said, presented in her story as poem, so as a novel in verse. So perhaps you can talk about that genre and what you hope kids will get from her story and why you write American history.
sure. So, as a college professor of American history, I can safely say that my students come in with very little knowledge about the how and the why of American history. They might know dates, they might know places, but they don't know underlying reasons. And Ethel Rosenberg has been maligned for decades with lots of assumptions about what she believed in or didn't believe in. And so research has become available as, federal trial records have become accessible through the efforts of her two sons, that she wasn't what people thought she was. And it's really hard to break through this perception that has grown over so many years. So my reason for writing American history is to get to the how and the why, to get underneath it, to get to the real people. And why verse is that I could get into Ethel's head much more readily. She was a mother, I'm a mother. I understand what it's like to have a son, and begin to interpret all the forces that were interacting in her place and her time. So we've got the Cold War emerging. We've got communism on the rise in the 30s during the Great Depression. And Ethel and other people like Ethel who grew up in poverty, the children of immigrants, want to have a level playing field. They want a utopia, not unlike what we see in YA fiction today, right? Or dystopia, as it turned out in Ethel's reality.
Yeah.
And what she did was not that atypical. It just got wrapped up in prejudices, anti-Semitism, the Korean War, and she and her husband just got wrapped up in that and her dysfunctional family that sold her down the river, literally.
Both of you have dealt with themes that are very relevant to today. And I think that's a way of really hooking the YA reader, that they can maybe see a relationship between the past to the present. So really what goes into sort of your writing that you consider where you really want to grab the reader and sort of engage them? What are some of your techniques you use? Gail?
Well, for my book that just came out, American Murderer, before I even started and I was just looking for an idea, I always look for gross things because I think kids are attracted to the gross in life. So that this is a book about an intestinal parasite. So I talk about outhouses, for example, and handling waste, human waste. It's gross. I don't mince words. I tell it the way it was. I talk about the medical aspects in medical language. And I think kids want that. I don't talk down to my audience. So most of my books have been like that. They've been about things like infected gunshot wounds and plague and amputations. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing is I try to use fiction techniques. Most of my books are narrative nonfiction. That means that I find an arc to the story. I develop characters. I develop scenes with characters speaking to each other. But all of that is absolutely true. But I have to do a lot of research in order to get the details to pull that off. And I think that is a way also that young adult readers can get pulled into nonfiction because then they can identify with the people that are in it. It can read a little bit like fiction, even though everything is absolutely true.
And Barbara, you touched on, writing poems, a novel in verse as a way of getting into her character. What other ways or what other things do you think of to engage the reader?
Well, Ethel is really a book about social justice. And social justice is really big in the curriculum right now with mandatory civics education, certainly in New Jersey, but I suppose elsewhere. And the cover itself shows Ethel fighting as she fought for workers' rights. Um, and and I think what poetry allowed me to do was to use certain poetic forms and rhythms of poetry, repetition. I use a villanelle for despair to get across her emotions in a way I don't think I could do in prose. So this fighting, this tension, this conflict through poetic techniques can really make her come alive on the page.
And, it seems that both books would be ideal for YA book clubs because they do engage the reader, they are relevant, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you feel they would be ideal for a book club situation. Gail, do you want to start?
Yeah. One of the things is that American Murderer, which is about hookworm disease in the United States, is a little known topic. So that means that everybody coming into a book club is going to be at the same level of ignorance about this topic, which makes it, fun for everybody. And I also think that it connects to today. So it's not irrelevant. Even though we don't hear about hookworm disease in the United States, there is probably 500 million to 1 billion people in the world, it's an estimate, that are infected with hookworm disease. And it has very severe effects on the health of people and the economies of the countries in which they live. So it is extremely relevant. And then the other aspect of it that makes it fun for a book club is that you can have a discussion about issues. There's controversy about this subject. There's ethics involved. So I don't come right out and say, this was good, this was bad. I just say what happened. And it can be up to the readers to discuss whether something was done correctly, something was done wrong. What are the ethics involved?
Sort of like what we're seeing now. And Barbara, how about Ethel?
it's very similar in that Ethel is controversial, and there are a lot of ethical considerations that can be discussed. The poetry makes her story very accessible. And then looking at, was there a travesty of justice? Can we make connections to today? And the answer to that is absolutely. Where we see that justice hasn't necessarily been served. So yeah, I think there could be a lot of great discussion, questions, and conversation around this book.
Yeah, and who says the America's past is the past? It's always, everything is relevant, which is exciting. So we have about a few minutes left, and I want to ask you both, you're both prolific, what you're working on next and what you're excited about. So we'll reverse it now. We'll go to Barbara first.
I am very excited about the next project, which is called Facing the Enemy, how a Nazi youth camp in America tested a friendship. And it's about two teenagers in Newark in the late 30s. One is Jewish and the other of German heritage. And the second boy goes to this Nazi youth camp and what it does to their friendship and to the people around them. It's based on a lot of primary research, a lot of newspapers, and it's also a novel in verse. So it shows the conflict and the tension through poetry. And that should be coming out next year sometime.
Okay, and how about you, Gail?
My next book is coming out in fall of 2024. It's called Spirit Sleuths. And it is kind of a combination of two previous books I've done. First was Spooked, which was about the 1938 radio broadcast in which Martians supposedly landed in New Jersey. And the theme of that book is what can happen when people are not sufficiently skeptical? They can be deceived. The second book is The Amazing Harry Keller, Great American Magician. He was one of the most famous magicians at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And that is the period that Spirit Sleuths mostly focuses on. Because after World War I and the great pandemic of influenza, there were millions of people who were dead. And their survivors were mourning them. And with this came a big rise in the belief in spiritualism. There were many mediums that went into business and had seances attracting these mourning people. And they would do certain techniques to convince people that were coming to them that ghosts were around. Levitation of objects, even tables in the room, materializations with ectoplasm. But there were magicians like Keller and particularly Harry Houdini, who recognized every single technique as something that all the stage magicians did and had been doing for decades. Houdini thought it was really cruel that people were being deceived in this way, and he set out to expose the fake and fraudulent mediums. He had a group of assistants that he called his secret service, and among those was a woman named Rose Mackenberg, who after Houdini died, took over that effort for 30 years. So that is basically the story of Spirit Sleuths.
Great. Well, thank you both for sharing. And, it's my honor to edit both of your books and to be the editor of the upcoming books. So again, Gail Jarrow, the author of American Murder, and Barbara Krasner, the author of Ethel's Song. Thank you so much for being with us today.